Social and labour movements protested outside Parliament as Finance Minister Tito Mboweni delivered his budget speech. Dominic Brown from the Alternative Information and Development Centre joins me now. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. You've said that there is nothing in this budget that facilitates an exit from economic stagnation. So what would your suggestions be to get us out of that position?
Well, I think that we've seen for a long time now that budget cuts, particularly from essential services like healthcare and education, doesn't get your country out of economic crisis. It actually worsens it. And in a context where we need to do everything that we can to advance and protect socio-economic rights, when there are other options available, the budget cuts that we've seen to infrastructure and other essential services to cover the debt service costs is actually unconstitutional. And what we should actually see is massive investment in infrastructure, not cuts in infrastructure, in healthcare, in education. Why should there be 4,000 schools that still have pit latrines where more micro-kamapis can die in? Why shouldn't we be spending some money on this?
Where's that money coming from?
So I think that there's numerous places where we can tap into to find the resources. In the first instance, in terms of Eskom and the Eskom debt, currently that's included in the budget on the fiscus, the debt service costs, even as a non-interest payment, which is wrong. It's an interest payment, it's on the loan, and it crowds out other essential services. So what we should do is we should remove that from the balance sheet of the budget on conditions that you transform Eskom by using the Government Employees Fund, Pension Fund, and the Public Investment Corporation. And what we have shown through our research at the Alternative Information and Development Centre is you can remove 250 to 300 billion from the GPF without putting any pensions at risk at all, direct it to a debt equity swap, which means now you have shares in Eskom, and you demand the reforming of Eskom to become a renewable energy public utility. But then there's beyond that, there's other ways of finding resources. Currently, South Africa loses tens of billions of rands each year as a result of big corporations shifting profits out of the country, avoiding paying their fair share in taxes and wages. Corporations also have more than 1.5 trillion rand stashed away on bank accounts, idle capital. A small tax on this incentivizes them to invest, but also raises a little bit of revenue to be able to invest in the economy. And in the context of trying to create a social compact, the fact that Kusatu is saying, as pensioners, we're happy to say, use some of the surpluses, right? Without putting our pensions at risk, use some of the surpluses. Why isn't business saying 10% of our investment is going to the rebuilding of this country? Why doesn't that, and use that to invest in essential service and so on? So there's lots of money actually, I think, available. We need to tax the rich. There's high net worth individuals, many of them that have more than 1.5 million rand in assets every year. All of these, none of this is taxed, or very little of this is taxed. Now, we don't want people to run away, but we also feel that if we're trying to build a country, a better life for all, in a context where there's mass unemployment and crazy inequality, if you earn more than 40,000 rand per month, you're in the top 1% in South Africa. That's unheard of. So let's get our shoulders to the wheel. Let's get the very rich to contribute to the building of a new South Africa. Why not?
Okay, you've spoken about that budget and saying that it's about the suffering of the working class and poor. Would that tax relief that was granted to people who earn around 265,000 and the increase to the social grants not count as a form of the government trying to show that they are trying to mitigate the difficult economic conditions that South Africans are facing?
For me, the grants, and I mean, you can speak to anyone who receives a grant, and most people would want more money. But the point is, just in terms of getting a baby's food on a child grant, just the formula for the milk takes up about 2/3 of a child grant. Did you know that? That's ridiculous, right? So that's unsustainable. And it's not as if these young women don't want to work. If you give them an opportunity to work at a decent pay, they will take it, no questions asked. So I think the question about where the money is going to come from, the social compact that we need, and so on, it's a question that lacks political will from government and business.
Okay. So that was my next issue, is that you protested as the cry of the excluded outside of Parliament, saying that vulnerable people in our society are not being listened to, and you want to see that perhaps reflected in the budget. Professor Tsepo Madlengozi has written about this issue, what he calls neo-apartheid constitutionalism. Says that even though there's changes that afford people, let's say, the right to access the economy in South Africa, people who were previously excluded, people who are mostly poor and black, still do not have access to these spaces. That issue is not an issue just about the budget. That issue is much bigger than what Tito Mboweni said on the 26th of February. So how do you deal with that in a larger way?
The budget constitutes 1/3 of the total GDP every year and about 1/3 of all our revenues. So even though you can't solve all the problems with the budget, you can definitely signal an intent of what kinds of policies you want to implement to correct things. What we see from the budget is a continuation, a dogmatic continuation of policies that have failed dismally in South Africa and worldwide. This business as usual approach is not going to work. And frankly, I don't even see that government will be able to cut the public sector wage bill in the way that it would like to.
Okay, our time is up. I need to ask you one more question and ask our director, Sis Khanyi, to allow me to do that. Peter Faber from SAICA says that it's not about what government can and can't do and what they should do. It's about affordability. So the wage bill has been tracking government expenditure growth at over 10% per annum, even though the country's revenue hasn't kept pace. So in theory, we want to make sure that people are looked after. But if it's an affordability issue, what's to be done?
I do think that the wages at the top can be trimmed. I do think there are some unnecessary wages in the public sector wage bill, but I think most of those workers are not overpaid, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of affordability, I don't think South Africa can afford to have and continue with an unemployment rate of more than 40%, and with inequality at the rates that we do, with climate change creating more pressures, all of these things. These are the types of things that we can't afford. And if we don't think about those things now, I can guarantee that the economic costs of these crises will be much bigger in the long run. So now we have an opportunity to correct things and do things better at this point, rather than going and imploding into chaos.
Dominic Brown from Alternative Information and Development Centre joining me in studio. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News this afternoon. More business news after the break. Do stay with us on Point.